Well, everyone, we're very honored to welcome back into the studio a longtime guest and a friend, Colonel Douglas Macgregor. He's one of the best geopolitical analysts out there. And Colonel, we need to get right to the bottom of this because we're seeing, the situation in the Middle East continuing to compound. Let me get your thoughts today as we're looking at a new blockade from the United States. We're looking at Iran potentially saying they're going to stop trade in the Red Sea. What do you make of the situation right now?
Well, let me take it from the standpoint of three important topics, and we'll treat the Trump topic of what he's doing or what he's trying to do last. First thing I want to point to is the global energy complex. For those that haven't been keeping score, the global energy complex consists of effectively thousands of oil tankers, refineries, production facilities, not simply in the Persian Gulf, but all over the world. And we're discovering some things that we didn't fully appreciate before. That if you take 15 million barrels of oil off the market every day, in fact, some people would say it's closer to 20, but we'll stick with 15 at the moment, that this disrupts not just those states that trade with the Gulf Cooperation Council or Kuwait or Qatar or Iran or anybody else. It suddenly affects everyone all over the globe. A good example, of course, is Australia. Has almost no petroleum strategic reserve. They are going to run out of diesel in an estimated 12 to 13 days. They have no refining capability, although they do have some oil left. And that means that their entire economy is effectively going to grind to a halt. This is just Australia. You find this very strange. I do, but then again, everybody tends to be complacent over time. They take things for granted. This energy complex, though, the situation could very, very quickly worsen. And we'll talk about that in a second. One of the unfortunate consequences is the fact that 35% of the world's fertilizer is gone. It's not available.
Wow.
That is practically the green revolution in reverse. Very few people today know anything about the green revolution that happened 50, 60, 70, 80 years ago, where people finally learned how to grow great quantities of food, which has contributed enormously to the growth in population. Right now, even if everything stopped right now, with that 35% shortfall in fertilizer, the world would be staring at famine over the next 2 years in various parts of the world. Even in the United States, where we have a fertilizer shortage, we are going to face in the future some food shortages. And we're probably in better shape than most people simply because we have as much oil as we do. Now, that brings me to something else. Right now, large numbers of tankers are lining up to come to the West Coast or the Gulf Coast and to try and load up on oil that they can't get anywhere else. Obviously, the oil industry is making a lot of money in the short term, but we're finding out that we cannot possibly make up for the shortfall because we can't even load that much oil in the time allotted. And we're also beginning to hear rumors in Washington that over the next few months, they're going to have to stop exporting oil because we're going to need it here at home, which means we're also going to see rationing here, which people have no experience with.
Wow.
I think we need to understand the impact of all this and remember, this is a war of choice. This is something Trump decided to do with the acquiescence of Congress. There was no vote. There was no declaration of war. There was no case made to the American people, frankly. But the energy complex is in ruins. It's going to get worse. The next thing, petrodollar. The petrodollar has been the source of I would argue, much of our prosperity and certainly much of our wealth. And this is the agreement that stemmed from the 1970s, where the agreement was essentially that all trade in energy would be in dollars, and that those dollars, once that had been accomplished, those dollars would find their way back into our economy. They would go into our treasuries and help finance our debt and essentially finance debt-based consumption, which is what we're in. We're in debt-financed consumption. We're living far beyond our means. All of that is about to come to a crashing end. Most people don't understand that because, not just because of the closure of the straits, but it's very clear that Iran has said you can buy whatever you want here, but you can't do it in dollars. It has to be done in preferably yuan, but we'll take rubles, we'll take other forms of currency. In the meantime, part of the community that has supported this petrodollar and the debt financed consumption in the United States consists of Saudi Arabia and the Emirates. The Emirates are not yet completely destroyed, but certainly I would say they're at probably 50 to 60% and could easily go to 70, 80, or 90%. Saudi Arabia right now is trying to export across the country through the pipeline over to Yenbo and Jeddah and elsewhere and utilize the Red Sea. Well, we have this group called the Houthis that the Saudis waged war against for several years, they're in a position to stop that. They don't have to sink any ships. They just have to destroy the port facilities. Even easier is to simply hit the pipeline.
Right.
And I used to ride up and down that pipeline in the run up to Desert Storm. It's very obvious. It's very easy. There's nothing hidden about it. And the major oil infrastructure facilities for refining and producing and so forth, so on, are in Al Jabail, which is an enormous port that's on the Gulf Coast. If that's destroyed, then I would say you're looking at perhaps as much as 10 years to recover inside the Gulf.
Wow.
President Trump does not seem to have considered any of these things. It doesn't seem to have figured prominently in any discussion because the emphasis from the beginning was always on Israel. We have to do this for Israel. I don't know that the United States historically has ever gone to war exclusively for one other state, another state, especially since our vital strategic interests are not at risk, and we're not at risk at the time. Now, that's changed. But certainly at the time we declared war, that was, or didn't declare war, we just went to war. That was not the case. And that brings us to the problem of Donald Trump. Everybody says, what is his strategy? What is he doing? I think to understand Donald Trump, and I didn't want to accept this for a long time, but now I absolutely embrace it. We have to go back and look at his great mentor, the man who most profoundly shaped Trump's character, education, and upbringing. That wasn't his father. It was a man named Roy Cohn. Roy Cohn had 3 rules for life. I think the first one was attack, attack, attack. Never stop attacking. In other words, be relentless. Regardless of whether or not you think you can win, regardless of whether or not your cause is just, those things don't matter. There's no morality involved. If you want something, you just attack, attack, attack till you get it. Secondly, deny everything. If you've done something wrong, if you've made a mistake, don't worry about it. Just deny, deny, deny. So those first 2 rules are very important. The third one was declare victory at all times. Whatever happens, you're a success. Whatever happens, you were victorious. Everyone else failed. Everyone else is irrelevant. Everyone else is stupid. You're the genius. You win. Declare victory, move on. Well, this has certainly served President Trump rather well. After all, he's declared bankruptcy 6 times. You could almost argue that for him and for many people in New York City who operate at that level of hundreds of millions and billions of dollars, bankruptcy is a business model.
Right.
Because you declare bankruptcy, you start over afresh. And you get money from someone else to build whatever you're going to try to do the next time around. So I think if you understand those things and you understand if there is anything called a strategy, it falls under those 3 points. And he decided he was going to attack Iran in support of Israel. Now, why would that be? Well, we could spend a lot of time tracing all the money, but clearly without the Zionist billionaires who provided him with enormous money and also herded people into their camp that had previously been against Trump, because the 2020 election was very different from the 2024 election. If you go back and look at it, Zuckerberg and a whole range of other people that had spent hundreds of millions of dollars to defeat Trump were absent. They pulled out. And in fact, they started showing up at Mar-a-Lago to kiss his ring. These people wanted war with Iran. They wanted war with Iran for at least 30, some people would say 40 years. Some people would say 47, but certainly for the last 30, it's indisputable. Right. And the notion was always that Israel will never be safe until all of its enemies are vanquished. And the most serious enemy is Iran. That was the argument. Remember, Iran's the state sponsor of terror in the world and all this. It's all crap. It's not true. It doesn't make any difference. Truth doesn't matter. Remember, rule number 1. We're going to attack.
Everyone, I hope you're enjoying today's video, and I want to give a huge thank you to our sponsor, Private Internet Access, who are longtime supporters of the channel, and honestly, a tool I use every single day. A VPN is one of the most important pieces of tech you can have. It hides your IP address and encrypts your internet connection, keeping your data safe and private. Because here's the reality. Whenever you're online, especially on public Wi-Fi, like airports or coffee shops, your personal information can be exposed. Your ISP, network administrators, corporations, and hackers can easily access that data. Using the internet without a VPN is like walking around with a see-through backpack. Everyone can see exactly what you have. That's why I use Private Internet Access. They've had over 30 million downloads, and most importantly, they don't track or store your data. That's not just a claim. It's been proven in court multiple times. On top of that, PIA lets you unlock content from around the world, bypass geo restrictions, and it works across all your devices with one subscription. And it's completely risk-free with a 30-day money-back guarantee. So if you want to protect your data and unlock the full internet, go to piavpn.com/Cyrus or click the link below to get 83% off. That's just $2.03 a month. And you also get an extra 4 months completely free. Once again, a huge thank you to Private Internet Access for sponsoring our video. And now back to our content.
So we're going to attack Iran, and then you get into this problem of, well, General, how long is this going to last? What's this going to take? What do you think we can do? And you turn to the intelligence community. You turn to your Israeli friends who are the ones putting you up to this anyway. And eventually it comes down to, well, it probably won't last more than a few days, maybe a week. They'll collapse. We'll get what we want. Well, that's failed. There's any chance of that happening, and only a low-grade moron would have concluded such a thing were even possible. I think the Israelis just lied to him, and he chose to believe the lie. Now he finds himself in a very difficult situation, and he can't admit defeat. He has to deny that anything has failed. And so we keep listening to this trope of, well, we've destroyed their army, or excuse me, their air force and their navy. Well, they really haven't had an air force since the Shah left the country.
Right.
So there's nothing to destroy. And navy, well, they had 7 old frigates, which were easy to target and sink. Not a problem. Then they have lots of these small boats. They have unmanned submersibles. They have unmanned craft on the surface. We haven't hit all of those. It's very difficult to do so. And they've got probably pens full of these damn things that they can send out at will. But we're still trying to do what we can. But he keeps falling back on these metrics that are familiar from the past, from Vietnam.
Right.
For you go back to Desert Storm, you can listen to Schwarzkopf stand up there and say, well, today we destroyed 152 artillery pieces and 300 tanks. Okay, fine. We found out that most of that was crap, was not true. And secondly, it didn't make any difference. It didn't induce anybody to go anywhere. They stayed where they were. We have something similar now with Iran, except that Iran's been preparing for this for at least 20 years. They have built massive underground complexes. The amount of damage inflicted on them is only visible on the surface, and it doesn't seem to have had much impact on their ability to continue launching missiles at all kinds of ranges, up to theater ballistic missiles. And they seem to have thousands and thousands of unmanned systems or drones left.
Right.
So that hasn't worked. And there's no evidence that Iran is starving. There's no evidence that Iran is about to disintegrate. There's no evidence that Iran is about to suffer tremendous unrest. If anything, there's a lot of evidence that we forced a great deal of cohesion on Iranian society. So that brings us to the final question. What are we going to do? And what about the blockade? Well, I would argue the blockade is not as serious as the president would like everyone to think. I think the blockade is part of this ceasefire facade. What's the ceasefire for? It's to replenish, refurbish, refit, refuel, rearm. That's what is going on in our camp. And by the way, that's happened with the Iranians. They have been refueled, rearmed, replenished by the Russians and the Chinese to the extent that they can. I think many of Iran's alleged losses have been made good, frankly, over the last few days, particularly by the Chinese. And so, President Trump seems to compensate for what is not happening by creating the illusion that things are happening. So he sends out these tweets. Oh, well, China promised me they're not going to send any more weapons, and they love me. I'm going to make them happy because they're going to get into the Gulf too, and they say, fine, let's go. It's all nonsense. It makes no sense. It's not real. Then we discover that during the last talks, our friend J.D. Vance, the vice president, stands up a couple of times, goes out of the room, and appears to have reported progress to Mr. Netanyahu. And we see that Mr. Witkoff and Mr. Kushner, two people who are not strictly speaking part of the government, have no diplomatic credibility. They've never done any work like that in the past. They just happen to be Trump's billionaire friends and Jewish, and apparently Zionists. That's enough to qualify them to go represent the interests of the United States and the American people. Put this picture together and you ask, well, what are you going to do now, Donald? And I think Donald has concluded that he only has one option, and that is to utterly destroy Iran, because he thinks that will compel the disintegration of the Iranian state and society, and ultimately compel the Iranians to do whatever the Israelis want them to do, because after all, that's what this is all about. We are not making demands. We say there are demands, but they are Israeli demands. What's the first Israeli demand? No more uranium enrichment. Absolutely off the table. Have to give it up completely and have to surrender your sovereignty to us by allowing us to inspect and ensure that that's the case. Well, the Iranians aren't going to do that. If they've learned one lesson from this war, they've learned that if you don't have a nuclear weapon, you are vulnerable to attack by the United States and Israel, both of whom do have nuclear weapons. And I think the others are very simply, you've got to dismantle most of your ballistic missile arsenal, because that threatens us, and we want you to be vulnerable to attack in perpetuity by us. So that has to go. And then finally, what's the last one? Well, I think the last one is you can't work with or support any of your friends in the region. What?
Yeah.
So the Iranians have said, no, we can't do that. Well, then you must be destroyed. End of discussion. And even though Israel's in very poor shape, has sustained a lot of damage, there's no question about it. We're not allowed to see it, obviously, but it's pretty severe. And large numbers of people have left Israel trying to get out, obviously the Jewish citizens of Israel. But the bottom line is that we're all waiting around for the ceasefire to end. And that's just the pause to rearm, refit, replenish. So that ends on Monday. So I think on Monday, they will commence the mother of all bombing campaigns. It'll be another attempt at a quote unquote war-winning air and missile campaign to bring Iran to its knees. And that won't work. And after 4 or 5 days of intensive bombing and missiles and everything else, the Iranians aren't going to show up to surrender. The Iranians are going to continue to launch missiles. The real question is, do we get to the point where Donald Trump says, well, that's all I can do. I can't do any more. I'm declaring victory. Can he leave at that point?
Right.
Well, it depends on who you are. If you're Donald Trump, you may not be able to leave. People will say, wait a minute now. You're going to turn over everything in the Persian Gulf to all of these other people and turn the strait over to the Iranians. You can't just do that. Of course, we've already done that. Because before the war began, everything was fine. The oil was flowing. All the critical products that petroleum is part of were being manufactured, everything from plastics to microcircuitry, aluminum, sulfuric acid, whatever, you name it, fertilizer. So what else could happen? Well, you have China. Chinese have a interest in things. Now, one of the things we need to keep in mind is that the Iranians do have other ways to export oil. They have overland pipelines. They have access to the Caspian Sea. Between those two and the railroads and everything else, they can move oil to China. Now, I can't tell you how much, but I can tell you that they've done that. They have that system in place, and they will do it. So it's not a complete washout for Iran, as President Trump would like to believe. But will the Chinese become involved in some way? They want access to the oil. They want access to the Persian Gulf. But if you're sitting in Beijing and you're watching us, you may be saying, these people are maniacs. The next thing you know, they're going to station missiles on Taiwan and dare us to attack. They'll want to attack us over Taiwan. We can't allow that to happen, because right now you just had the leader of the majority party in Taiwan visit Beijing, talk to the leadership, President Xi, and they all said, look, we're good. There will be no war.
Correct.
There's not going to be a war. And in all likelihood, we will vote ourselves into China. This is going to happen. This is back to the evolutionary program that was already in place before we decided to challenge China's interests on China's turf. Maybe the Chinese decide to become involved now. I don't know. They could. And then there are the Russians. And of course, the Russians have just they estimate 1 trillion rubles as a windfall profit, above and beyond what they were getting for their oil. Lavrov was just in Beijing. He says, we're going to drill, baby, drill. And we're going to supply everything we possibly can to you and the Japanese and the Koreans and everybody else. But we're going to make sure you, China, get what you need. And now we're seeing that there are buildups of troops inside Ukraine on two principal axes. One is from Sumy that goes due west towards Kiev, and the other is in the south that would lead up through Zaporozhye, cross the river, and move down into Odessa. I would not be surprised if we see Vladimir Putin say, well, at this point, let's get this over with once and for all. I mean, he's effectively won strategically, but, everyone's tired of this annoyance of Ukrainian drones being flown because they have nothing else to send. They don't have anybody that can attack anymore. They just send people out to die on the battlefield. All of these things somehow or another are going to converge in a way that is bad for us. So that's my synopsis of the global goat screw, if you want to call it something. That's what I think it is.
Yeah, that's a fascinating insight, Colonel. And I just wanted to give you the floor there, let you talk, because you had so many good ways to pull all of these global ones together. I mean, I think what we're looking at is, so far, we're coming into the 7th week, At this point, I think it's been a strategic defeat for the United States. We haven't achieved a single military objective. What I want to kind of touch back on Donald Trump. And, is he really, looking for an exit ramp here? I mean, do you think that, for example, he will just pull out here and just declare a victory like you had said? His mentor told him, just declare a victory at all times? Or do you think this is going to escalate to the point where we could potentially see U.S. troops on the ground in Iran and taking it to that level of conflict?
Everybody gets excited over the troops, but we have to understand the troops that have been shipped over there or flown in, whatever you want to call it, they are largely light infantry. Now, they're good soldiers, good Marines. They're organized, trained, and equipped for missions that went away 30, 40 years ago, but we cling tenaciously to the past when it comes to the American military. So we still have an airborne division ready to drop on somebody somewhere and be utterly annihilated. There's a wonderful book that's called Thriving on Failure, and it's all about airborne forces, and it goes through all the existing airborne forces and how many there are and what there were to begin with. We're the ones who have this large division full of light infantry. But in 1991, when Schwarzkopf, who was an infantry officer, was told, why don't we take the 82nd and let them jump into, say, An Nasiriyah, which was a giant airfield near the Euphrates River. He said, what are you, crazy? How can we be sure that the air defenses there won't open up and kill everybody? He said, forget it. They're not going. So when the 82nd did ultimately get in, they rode on school buses. Kind of a humiliating experience for a paratrooper, but they rode on school buses into the country. Then you have the Marines. The Marines wanted to stage an assault on the Kuwait city port. And Schwarzkopf basically threw them out and said, what are you, nuts? You're going to have more people killed in accidents, and we don't need it. It's too risky. Forget it. It's a waste of time, because the Marines had tried to make a landing on the Iraqi coast. One of the Navy's vessels hit a mine, and that was the end of it, because mines, what do you do about them? How do you know that you've got them all? You only need 2 or 3 mines out there. In fact, a Marine general at the time said all you have to do is see a bunch of people throw 50-gallon drums into the water, and that's the end of the amphibious operation. So we have these light infantry, and presumably they want to use them to seize islands in the Persian Gulf, on the assumption that if you seize 2 or 3 islands, that this is a game changer. I haven't figured out how, because at the end of the day, none of the ships that want to move through that strait are going to be underwritten by insurance. Lloyd's of London won't do it. Won't have anything to do with it under any circumstances, as long as it's a war zone. It was Lloyd's of London that shut down the Strait of Hormuz, not Iran. Now, Iran has got it under control, but how does seizing a couple of islands change that? If anything, assuming they could get to those islands without being shot out of the sky, then they've got to stay there. That means they've got to protect themselves from the tactical ballistic missiles and the unmanned systems. That's specifically, the Shahad drones and all these things that come pouring in with warheads on them with pinpoint accuracy. I don't see anything good emerging from this. And I don't think that Donald Trump, as we discussed before, is prepared to admit defeat. So we're going to see one last, I think, dramatic attempt to crush Iran. After that, anything is possible. But I continue to wonder what the Chinese in particular may do. And then if you look at the rest of the region, the Israeli leaders have been talking openly in ways I think are very, very dangerous, but they're not wrong, but they're doing it publicly, insisting that Turkey is, or as they say now, Turkey is the way they want you to pronounce it, is really postured to attack Israel. Well, from the very beginning, Ottoman Turkey, and then subsequently the Turkish state we have today, has been the 500-pound gorilla in the room. They are a natural strategic power, if you will. The regional dynamics produce that. In fact, if you go back over the last 2,000 years, you can argue you have 2 great powers. One is Turkey, and the other is Persia. Now, the Persians have taken a beating, but they're not going out of business. They're not going under. They're not going to surrender. Israel has taken a terrible beating. And this next round, I think, could be fatal to Israel in many ways. And the Israelis, this is President or Prime Minister Netanyahu and his predecessor, Naftali Bennett, have both said that the Turks are potentially an even greater threat to Israel than Iran. Wow. So I guess the assumption is that they're now going to harness the American armed forces to an attack on the Turks. I don't think that's going to work. Then you have Egypt, and Egypt is a boiling pot. And our friend General Sisi is swimming uncomfortably in the boiling water. He could be gone any minute. He's afraid to do anything for fear that whatever he does may backfire. But Egypt and its population and its armed forces are up in arms and want desperately to punish the Israelis for what they've done to their Palestinian Arab brethren. And then, of course, on the other side, you have Mr. Erdogan and his Ottoman aspirations. They have the largest army in NATO. They have exceptionally competent ground forces, well armed, well equipped. They have missiles, tactical ballistic missiles, theater ballistic missiles, a lot of unmanned systems. They have a substantial navy that can do a lot of damage from the sea. What's to stop the Turks and the Egyptians from suddenly moving decisively against Israel to finish it off? Why would they not do that? The hatred today for the Jewish state in the region is greater than at any point in its entire history. So, I mean, all these things are possibilities. I'm not Nostradamus. I can't tell you what's going to happen, but I can tell you the potential is terrible.
Right.
And then, of course, we haven't talked about the nuclear weapon or weapons that Israel has at its disposal that it could potentially use. Now, the Russians have made some threatening statements, warning the Israelis not to even think about it. The Pakistanis have promised that if the Israelis use a nuclear weapon, they will see to it that Israel is nuked. And, of course, the Chinese have said this would be the demise of Israel.
Right.
So one hopes that will not happen, but we don't seem to have any control over Israel. Israel seems to have a great deal of control over us.
Colonel, what about Donald Trump? I mean, as you're looking at him, we've seen him share this AI image of him depicted as Jesus, and we just seem to see a lot of crazy things coming out of the White House. Are you worried at all about his mental capacity? I mean, has he really kind of lost it right now? Is he really just not in the right mental space to lead this country anymore?
I think that's true. And there is a way to rectify that. That's the 25th Amendment. And that involves the cabinet meeting and deciding to remove him from office. As far as I can tell, everybody in the cabinet lives in fear of Donald Trump, probably J.D. Vance most of all. So I don't see anything happening there. However, there is a possibility if the Zionist billionaires like Larry Ellison and Ackerman and Zuckerberg and others decide that he has become more of a liability than an asset to them and their goals and aspirations for what I would call Jewish supremacy in the Middle East and potentially the domination of the international finance world, then they could say it's time for him to go. And that might change things because remember, these same people control the Congress. How many people have stood up and spoken out forcefully for an end to the conflict, immediate end to the conflict on the basis of, the Constitution or congressional preferences or anything else? How many have said, we will not fund this any longer? None of that's happened. You can find a couple of Republicans, a couple of Democrats here or there, but the vast majority, quiet. So it'll be interesting when Trump goes down for this, and I think he will. I think at the end of the day, this is going to be a catastrophe, a fiasco. He'll be punished for it. He'll be the scapegoat, so to say, but he's a principal actor in his own tragedy. But the rest of the Congress thinks they're going to skate and walk away from this. I don't think so. I think what's coming economically and financially for us is disastrous. And people are going to say, how could you have done this to us?
Right.
They'll all be gone.
Yeah. I think it's, I mean, it certainly seems that way. His poll numbers are at a record low. I mean, we're only in April. I mean, we still have quite a few months until the November midterm elections. But I think the longer this catastrophe continues, the harder it's going to be for Trump to, maintain power. And I think this could certainly be the beginning of the end.
Yeah, the question is, what difference do the midterms make?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the only thing that I can see on what I would call the hard left is hatred for white people, hatred for this country, for the white civilization they despise. I mean, that's pretty obvious. And they'll do whatever they can to undermine the rule of law and promote unrest in the country. That's the hard left. But the rest, what difference is there? I mean, they're all basically going to do the same thing. It's all about self-enrichment.
Right.
They are all part of what I call the larger Epstein class. What part of the Epstein class do you want to vote for in November?
You've made a good case for that. I think the next move is going to be probably more escalation from the United States. After this ceasefire ends, potential one last attempt to really bomb Iran into oblivion. How long do you see that lasting? How long do you see this conflict? Like, if I could get your predictions on, what do you see from here? And
my suspicion is that General Kane, who is essentially the chief executive for this operation, he's an airman. He thinks in terms of bomb tonnage, targets attacked, and so forth. If he walks into the Oval Office after 3 to 4 days and he doesn't have concrete evidence for imminent collapse or disintegration, they'll start talking seriously about how they disengage. Now, how would you disengage? The intelligent thing is, first of all, don't go through another bombing, which is a waste of time. I wish that would not happen. The intelligent thing is to say, look, we've done as much as we can do, and we have not been successful. There is only one way forward, and it is not military power. We need an international conference of great powers and small powers that will sit down and discuss how to end this thing, how to restart the energy complex and get it back on its feet, how to manage the Strait of Hormuz in the future. As I've told people, if you go to the Dardanelles Straits between Turkey and Europe, in the Bosporus, as we call it, the Turks are in charge of managing it. And that Montreux Convention was achieved in 1926, and the Turks have handled it very efficiently and very competently. There's never been a problem. So I don't see any reason why we just don't come to terms with reality and say, who has most of the coastline in the Persian Gulf? Iran. Who has the greatest stake in what happens in the Gulf? Iran. Then Iran can be made responsible for the management of the strait. However, that has to be carefully defined, delineated to everyone's satisfaction, the way the Montreux Convention was. But you're asking Donald Trump to turn on Netanyahu, turn on the Zionist billionaires and say, look, we can't do this anymore. This is harming the United States. We've gone too far. Is he the sort of character who's going to do that? I don't think so. I think he's Roy Cohn's man. And Roy Cohn's man is going to say, attack, attack, attack, deny everything, insist everything is great and victorious. So I don't pay too much attention to all of these, 2 in the morning tweets and things that come out, or X posts. I think a lot of it is just imaginary nonsense, and some of it is outrageous. But the fact that he would pretend to be a Christ-like figure suggests a certain instability of mind that we cannot ignore. And then to listen to him try to explain it and tell us all, well, I was thinking of myself as a physician who's going to heal people. Unbelievable. The man should go. And I think he will ultimately be relieved. And the sooner they do that, the better. But the problem is, what do you do next? J.D. Vance is just as aligned in the Israel First Club as Donald Trump was. Now, it may be that there's more in the Epstein file about Trump and probably not as much about Vance, who knows? But the Epstein class is still in power. It's not going to last. They're all going to go down for this. We're headed into terrible territory, not just globally, but in our own country. But in the meantime, you're stuck. So if you remove Trump and you put J.D. Vance in, are you going to get fundamental change?
Right.
Hard to imagine.
Yeah. It'd be very hard to imagine. Well, Colonel, I just want to say thank you so much for your incredible time today. It is always so fascinating to chat with you. Tell everybody where we can find more of your work. I know you have a growing Substack that's doing really wonderful. Just let everybody know where we can follow you.
Yeah, it's called MacGregor Warrior Substack, and I invite people to go look at it. I've done 2 things. Actually, a lot of people have told me. Not only have I put new things on there that I've written within the last 2 to 3 weeks, which everybody seems to like, but I'm also posting things that were published years ago, nice. Going back to 2009, 2008, and 2012, and 2017, 18. Where I talk about all of the things, frankly, that you're seeing today in the Gulf in terms of the use of strike systems, manned and unmanned, and their links to overhead surveillance, and that persistent surveillance provides accurate data for targeting. So Iran has effectively turned everything from 500 to 1,000 miles beyond its border into a killing zone. Because if you show up there and you're going to be seen, you're going to be detected. If you can be seen, you're going to be targeted. If you can be targeted, you can be killed. It's that simple. This is the 21st century way of war. We're using World War II as the template. It's not going to work.
Colonel, I want to say thank you again for your amazing insights. I know our audience absolutely loves you, and I'm so excited to just sit down and learn from you. We're going to drop all of those links down in the description below so that you can follow the Colonel's Substack.
Well, everyone, I want to thank you so much for making it to this point of the video, and I want to give a huge thank you once again to Private Internet Access for bringing today's interview to this YouTube channel. I could not make this channel possible without our generous sponsors, and if you're in the market for a new VPN, simply scan the QR code on screen or click the links down below. Doing so helps continue our work here on YouTube, and it is a massive support to the channel. Once again, my name is Cyrus Janssen. It's our absolute pleasure to bring you the best interviews from geopolitical experts around the world. Thank you all for your amazing support, and I look forward to seeing you all in our next video soon.
Abi. Evet. Bir de o da kaça geliyor? Şu an bile bir yarım dakika getireceğiz yani. Kaseti takana kadar. Kalır. 1:20 falan kalıyor. Yok. 1,5 dakika falan kalıyor bir şarkıyı kapatmamıza.
Sıçtık amına koyayım.
Neyse dur bakalım.
Buralara falan
direkt
bir de
atalım
böyle
ya.
tık tık tık. Bence şu görüntüler bir tık ver gene.
Şunu şuradan böyle.
Remzi Baba'nın şeyleri, dövmeleri şekil çünkü. Kast çok iyi ya. Kast çok iyi. Seju, bunu senin telefonu böyle buraya koyuyorum moruk. Tamam mı? Tamam. Beni çek. Tamam ver ama. Çek. İşi var arkadaşımızın. Evet, bizim malikanede üretime devam ediyoruz. Böyle pencere açtığımız zaman da aşırı bir ses oluyor ama olsun, yapacak bir şey yok. Albümün iyi şarkılarından birine klip çektik. Konsept bir klip. Uzun zamandır düşündüğümüz bir senaryoydu. Sonunda bunu gerçekleştirdik yani. Ama 2,5-3 dakikalık şarkıya neredeyse yarım saat olabilecek bir kısa filmi nasıl sığdırabiliriz bunu düşünüyoruz yani. O yüzden de biraz kurguda bizi zorluyor. Ama çok güzel olacak. Eğer hayal ettiğim gibi olursa çok güzel olacak. Yapmak istediğim şeylerden birini daha yapmış olacağım yani. İsmi Döngü. Yine havaya bir mesaj bırakıyoruz anlayana. Ama güzel klip oldu. Hocam görüntü yönetmeni kime deniyor?
Görüntü yönetmeni.
Görüntü yönetmeni tam olarak ne yapıyor yani?
Görüntü yönetmeni işte kısa film ya da film.
Çeken insana görüntü yönetmeni mi deniyor?
Ya aslında görüntüden sorumlu kişiye o deniyor da kamera ekibinin başı yani esas. Şeyi o.
Ben şimdi Remzi mesela oynarken ona oyun verdim ya, şimdi ben ne yapmış oldum mesela?
Orada yönetmenlik aslında.
Oyuncu yönetmenliği falan mı?
Yok, direkt yönetmenlik. Ya oyuncuyu normalde yönetmen yönetiyor.
Ha.
Şeyi o.
Ama orada benim kafamdaki gibi bir şey olsun diye ben Remzi'yi benim yönlendirmem gerekiyordu yani aslında.
Tabii.
Tamam. O görüntüden izleyen insan kim oluyor? Şeyden mesela başka bir ekrandan izliyor ya birisi çekerken. O yönetmen mi oluyor?
Genelde aynen.
Görüntü yönetmeni
Ya
ne
da
oluyor?
yardımcı yönetmene de bir şey yapabiliyorlar bazen. O bir şey oluyor da. Değişiyor. Burası da
Çek.
banyo. Başka neyimiz var bizim ya?
Abi şey sahnemiz var. Araba sahnemiz var. Kapıcı dilenci geliyor eve.
Evet,
Dilenci sahnesi var.
Dilenci var. Şu dayak sahnesi var.
Bir
Ofis
de
var. Banyo
yok,
var.
şey var, banyo var.
4 yani.
4.
Ofis geldi.
Ofis en son. Ofis bağladığımız yer.
Aynen.
3 tane var. Bir kapı sahnesi var. Bir bu var. Bir de küvet var zaten.
3 tane var. Aynen.